This is the story of a brutal act of terror, the loss of 58 innocent lives, and the man who almost got away with it. Interpol and the FBI embark on a worldwide manhunt to catch a merciless terrorist before he has the opportunity to strike again. Jurisdiction, the world. When crimes are committed, an international organization unites police officers to deliver justice. Interpol investigates. November the 23rd, 1985. Athens, Greece. Athens airport is crowded that day, packed with travelers from dozens of countries. 5 months earlier, TWA Flight 847 was hijacked, and one American was killed. Airport security is tightened. But Anthony Lyons, an Australian steel salesman, sees something he doesn't like at the metal detector.
And the guy stopped him, and so he put his hand in his pocket and he pulled out the camera, showed it to the guy, and the guy never made him go round back through again. He just said, "Oh, okay."
3 young businessmen follow the man with the camera through the security checkpoint. Like Anthony Lyons, they're traveling from Athens to Cairo. It's a trip they've been planning for some time. Their bags are X-rayed and cleared. Lyons arrives at the gate to find that the flight to Cairo has been delayed and notices the 3 businessmen at the end of the line seem agitated. Elizabeth Fisher is Australian. She has been waiting 4 hours to fly standby to Cairo. Renita Darby and Shoshana Elias are Israeli. The 2 friends are traveling to Asia via Cairo because the fares are cheaper. Drew William is an American. A fisherman by trade, he's flying to Cairo to see the sights.
When the desk finally opened, it was a great rush of bodies. And in the rush, there was a lady, an Australian lady, who was pushed out of the line, and she'd been there very early, and I didn't like that.
Excuse me, mate. Ladies first.
Lyons forces one of the businessmen to return to the back of the queue.
When I intervened, I don't think he was happy to go back in the line, because obviously he wanted a particular seat, or he wanted to get a seat in a particular area.
The 3 businessmen finally present their passports to the ticket agent. Omar Marzuki is traveling on a forged passport. His real name is Omar Mohammed Ali Razak. His 2 accomplices, Chakori Salah Salim and Bu Said Nar al-Din Mohammed, are also traveling with fake passports. All 3 men are working for the Abu Nidal organization, one of the most violent terrorist groups in the world. In the early 1980s, terror was on a deadly rise. In 1983, a suicide bomber attacked the Marine barracks in Lebanon. In 1985, terrorists hijacked the cruise ship Achille Lauro and threw a disabled American overboard. Even with increased security, travelers still feel frightened. Unaware of the danger that awaits them, 91 people board Flight 648. Anthony Lyons is seated in coach next to Elizabeth Fisher. Razak is seated directly across the aisle from them. Salim and Bou Said have requested separate seats. They move to the middle and the rear of the aircraft. Lyons notices Razak's behavior.
I didn't sort of pay much attention to us at first because I was talking to Elizabeth Fisher. But after a while, when I turned and looked at him, I noticed that he was perspiring heavily around the mouth. And he was staring straight forward, and he was clenching his hands, clenching and unclenching them. I thought, wow, this guy's nervous of flying.
In the cockpit, pilot Hani Galal and co-pilot Imad Monib go through their pre-flight checklist.
Copy, gentlemen.
They are anxious to get off the ground.
We are late, and being late is not a good thing for a pilot.
At 9:03 p.m., Egypt Air Flight 648 is finally cleared for takeoff. "20 minutes into the flight, Captain Galal turns off the no smoking fasten seatbelt sign.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Captain
Razak makes his move. Elizabeth Fisher shows Anthony Lyons a new camera.
All of a sudden she went white, and she was looking past me and she said, "What's that?" I said, "What's what?"
And then the unthinkable happens. Razak emerges from the lavatory yelling in both English and Arabic for the passengers to stay seated.
He had a revolver in one hand and an Eastern Bloc percussion grenade in the other.
Egypt Air Flight 648 has just been hijacked. Salim and Bou Said threaten the passengers with pistols and hand grenades. Razak runs into the cockpit.
I heard fast footsteps, like someone running. But before I started to investigate, the cockpit door was banged open. Somebody kicked it.
At gunpoint, Omar Razak orders the pilot to change course. He orders him to redirect to Malta.
We don't have enough fuel.
Captain Galal needs to come up with a plan of his own.
Your mind usually, as a captain, starts to think very fast. I mean, you don't stop thinking and counting and calculating things for a second. I insisted on going to Cairo because we have limited fuel. He said, no, alter your course to Malta. My co-pilot had put a special code on our transponder giving a signal to traffic control in Athens that we are being hijacked.
On the radar screen, air traffic controllers can see Egypt Air Flight 648 change course. In the cabin, the terrified passengers have no idea where they're going or why.
We had an announcement from the stewardess saying that they had taken over this aircraft, and if everybody did what they were told, nobody would be harmed.
Through the stewardess, the hijackers identify themselves as members of Egypt's Revolution, a violent faction of Abu Nidal's radical Palestinian group. Razak tells the pilot his organization condemns the Egyptian regime for the manner in which it had been conducting its affairs in the Middle East.
There's things you have to realize about being in an airplane. Panic is going to do you no good because there's nowhere to go. You can't run anywhere, and you can't hide. You are there for whatever's going to happen.
Salim orders the passengers to take out their passports.
You, passport! Passport! Quick, quick!
Next, the hijackers sort the passengers.
They collected all the passports and they started calling people by their passports and taking them to the front, frisking them.
Get to the back!
They put us into some type of order. The Americans, the Australians, Belgians, French, they were all at the front of the aircraft. Everybody else, the Greek passengers, the Egyptian passengers, were all kept separated further down the aircraft. And there happened to be two young Israeli girls on the flight, and they were put at the front of the aircraft.
You, come here, come here.
Salim also orders Anthony Lyons to take a seat up front.
No shot.
They confiscated my camera. He took it and he ripped the film out of it and then threw the camera hard down against the bulkhead at the front of the aircraft. He believed that it was that camera that I had been using and I may have taken his photograph.
When the hijackers reached Medat Mustafa Kamal, the passenger produces more than a passport.
All of a sudden, all hell broke loose. There were many, many gunshots. And the hijacker who was stood alongside me was firing wildly down the length of the aircraft.
Mustafa Kamal is an Egyptian sky marshal. Inside the cockpit, Razak reacts to the sound of gunfire.
They fired wildly at the sky marshal. In so doing, they wounded some other people, and the sky marshal got a number of bullets in his body.
In all, a flurry of 27 shots ripped through the fuselage of the 737.
Some of the bullets penetrated the skin of the aircraft, and we were losing pressurization. So I made what we call an emergency descent. You cannot stay on the altitude of 33,000 feet or 35,000 feet with a hole in your aircraft, because the hole will get bigger and bigger.
The cabin pressure is dropping. Pilot Galal puts the plane into a steep dive. He has to get to 14,000 feet fast, or the plane will break apart.
Move!
30,000 feet over the Mediterranean, a hijacking turns into a gun battle. Bullets tear through passengers, crew members, and the outer wall of the aircraft. Anthony Lyons fears the worst.
The aircraft started to dip and go into a dive. And the cockpit door was flapping open and closed wildly. And as the aircraft was going into this deep dive, the oxygen masks all came out, dangling in front of us, and we had to put them on. I didn't know whether we were going straight on into the sea or what we were doing. But I hope this is a controlled dive. I was thinking about the fact that I wasn't going to see my kids grow up.
Captain Hani Galal struggles to keep the diving plane stable and his passengers alive.
When you lose pressure, you lose air, and people suffocate. So you have to go down as fast as possible to an altitude where people can breathe normally from the normal air around their aircraft.
Galal levels off at 14,000 feet, only to face a new crisis.
I was flying very low at that time. When you fly low, you burn more fuel, almost 1/3 more. I had to land at Malta.
He He radios the tower at Lucca International Airport on the small island of Malta, detailing the situation.
Egypt Air 648.
I told them that permission to land at Malta. They said, you don't have permission.
The pilot's only other option is to ditch the aircraft in the sea.
Then I started pleading to them in the name of humanity that let us land because we will die and you will be responsible.
Larry Fenich is the Assistant CEO Air Traffic Controller in Malta.
The chances of survival of an aircraft like that ditching in the ocean will be very remote, that people can be saved from it because of the speed the aircraft would hit the water, the angle that it would hit. The loss of life would have been high.
Maltese authorities don't want the plane to crash, but they don't want an international incident either. To make landing impossible, they ordered the air traffic controllers to turn off all the runway lights. But Galal is so low on fuel, he has no choice. He must risk landing blind. Galal turns the plane in a wide arc and descends into complete darkness.
Having landed, I have to tell you that the only feeling I had was, I don't want this damn aircraft to ever take off again. I felt better being on the ground, and I'm sure everybody else felt the same.
The plane is ordered to taxi to a remote airstrip where Maltese security forces wait to surround it. In the cockpit, Razak is at a loss. With the lead hijacker critically injured, he's got to figure out what to do now. Now all he wants to do is save himself and the other surviving hijacker.
Power. We need fuel, doctor, and engineer.
He demands the aircraft be refueled so they can take off again. He also wants a doctor to examine his accomplice and an engineer to inspect the damage to the plane. Maltese government officials arrive in the tower to supervise the negotiations. They agree to send in medical personnel, but only if the hijackers agree to release some of the passengers.
You have to release hostages before they bring the physician and the refueling.
Razak returns to the cabin.
You, come!
Okay, baby, go.
The hijacker orders several Egyptian and Filipino women to move to the front of the plane. They are released unharmed onto the tarmac.
Soon after, a doctor came on board, and he first of all looked at the hijacker lying across row one, and he shook his head to say that he was dead. And then he looked at the sky marshal, who he found was still alive, although had been shot many times.
Chakori Salim, the lead hijacker, is dead. As the medical team evacuates the patient, Razak strikes.
As the sky marshal was taken off the aircraft, Razak shot him in the back again.
He was one of the worst type of terrorists, a brainwashed killing machine. He has absolutely no mercy, nothing in his... so he's capable of doing it again.
Now, with only 2 hijackers on board, Razak threatens to execute a hostage every 15 minutes until the tower agrees to refuel the plane. Authorities decide to call his bluff. They try and negotiate the safe return of the hostages.
The negotiations were hinged on the fact that they were trying to prolong the situation, not give him fuel. They didn't want the problem to be transferred to another country. The main purpose was to get some of the hostages released. You give us hostages and we give you something else. Food, yes, Doctors, yes. Engineers, yes. But fuel, no.
Razak responds with a tragic demonstration.
We had this stewardess come out.
Bring this one.
And she read a name out from a passport. And it was a young Israeli girl. And she got up and went to the front. She was called to the front. She gets up there and Razak takes her and turns her to go out. And he steps out behind her. And we heard a shot. And it was absolute stunned silence. We couldn't believe it.
Razak pushes the young woman's body onto the tarmac.
I don't think anybody believed that he would actually do it. But suddenly we got a call from the people who were surrounding the aircraft in the strategic positions that he had just shot a person at the door of the aircraft.
Somehow, Ranita Darby survives the shot and crawls away, but Razak is relentless.
And I still remember it. I felt sick. You know, it was such a sense of loss.
On board the aircraft, Razak calls another Israeli to the front of the plane.
So when they made the second announcement for the second Israeli girl to go to the front, this girl obviously knew what her fate was going to be. So she never answered. And the stewardess kept saying very stridently, "There is another Israeli girl on this flight. Would she please come forward?"
Shoshana Elias is 23 years old and terrified.
She sort of collapsed in the front part of the aircraft there, in front of the cockpit door. And she wouldn't go out. And Razak kneed her with his knee, put his knee into her and pushed her and probed her and pushed her outside the door.
I started to plead to Malta, give us fuel, we have to go out. Let me take him to where he wants.
Maltese authorities face an impossible decision. If they give in, Malta could become a haven for hijackers. If they refuse, an innocent young woman will die. In Malta, a Palestinian hijacker threatens to shoot a passenger every 15 minutes until authorities refuel the plane and let it take off. One woman has already been shot. But Maltese authorities still refuse to negotiate with the terrorists. Now, 2 young women have been shot in cold blood. The stunned Maltese authorities and Captain Hani Galal, the pilot, share the terror and outrage of the events.
Never feel that kind of anger in my life. It becomes like shooting some of your family, and you are not being able to do something about it.
Maltese security forces surrounding the aircraft move closer. Razak spies them from the cockpit.
Asked who are they, and they give him a very smart answer, is these forces are here to protect you because the Americans might attack you from there.
Razak screams at the tower to make the soldiers back off. The soldiers hold their position. Authorities tell Razak he has no choice but to surrender. He has no way out. If the hijackers try to leave the island, American jets based in nearby Italy will intercept the plane and force it down.
We already contacted the U.S. military. They will shoot down this plane.
The response enrages the hijacker. He pulls on his mask and returns to the cabin. Razak rifles through the bucket full of passports.
There was a pecking order in which way people were going to be called and executed. Americans were very much the second in line for execution.
Drew William, an American commercial fisherman, is called to the front of the plane.
He was a very tall man, probably 6'6", 6'5", 6'6", something like that. So when they took him to the front, he was much taller than Razak. So when he stepped out and Razak stepped out behind him, I actually watched as Razak raised the gun to the back of his head. And there was the shot. And we thought, well, that's it. He's dead.
Miraculously, the defective bullet does not penetrate William's skull. He lies still until Razak closes the cabin door and then limps away from the aircraft. As two more Americans are called and shot, Anthony Lyons, an Australian, wonders who is next.
I was trying to put together a plan in my head as to what I would do if I was called for execution. I felt that if you are in a situation where Razak comes behind you with a gun, I was going to make one step out and then very quickly throw myself over the side of the stairs. No matter what it took and what the fall was like, I was going to do that.
In the morning, Galal begins to stall for time. He asks Razak's permission to request food for the passengers.
Please demand food for the passengers. They're hungry.
And to have the bodies removed from the tarmac. Razak agrees. At 8 a.m., a catering truck moves past the soldiers and delivers food to the steps of the aircraft. Next, an ambulance arrives to remove the bodies from the tarmac. Shoshona Elias is dead. Renita Darby is critically wounded, but incredibly is still alive. The ambulance takes the bodies to St. Luke's Hospital. Although the standoff has gone on for hours, Razak shows no indication of giving up. The authorities are faced with an agonizing decision. US and Egyptian authorities have sent Special Forces commandos to Malta to help rescue the passengers. The government of Malta decides to allow the Egyptian commandos to recover their country's plane. They deny US forces permission to land. Nearly 24 hours have passed since Flight 648 was hijacked in Athens. Egyptian commandos begin to plan their assault of the plane. They have very little information on how many hijackers are still on board, what they look like, or where they are positioned. Their mission has only one simple objective: to take out the terrorists. They will create a diversion by detonating an explosion inside the cargo bay at the back of the plane. They will then enter the aircraft through the windows over each wing. At nightfall, the Egyptian commandos approach the plane. They try to stay in the blind spot behind the cockpit, where Razak can't see them. On board the plane, it seems the hijackers can sense something is going on.
I could hear the bullets in his pockets rattling. as he moved, and he was anxious about something. Obviously, something was afoot, and people could see out the windows that there was movement in the grass at the side of the aircraft.
As the commandos place their explosive charges, they are unaware that a few feet away, many of the passengers are seated directly over the cargo hold. On the small island nation of Malta, the hijacking of an Egypt air jet turns deadly. 25 hours into the hijacking, Egyptian commandos prepare to assault the plane with a diversionary explosion in the cargo hold. The blast rips through the back of the plane.
When it went off, it exploded and blew a hole through the floor there and blew everybody in that area up and started a fireball which raced down the inside of the aircraft.
Bu Said, one of the two remaining hijackers, is incinerated in the blast. The commandos rush into the plane. In the cockpit, pilot Hani Galal is injured by the blast. He tells his co-pilot to escape through the cockpit window while he goes after the hijacker. As Razak emerges from the cockpit, one of the commandos wounds him. Galal attacks the hijacker with a fire axe, but Razak escapes through the cabin door. Galal returns to the cockpit. Now he must get out of the plane.
Opened the cockpit and the window and threw myself down.
Nearly 70 passengers are trapped inside the aircraft, disoriented by the smoke, choking on toxic fumes, and unable to find a way out. Lyons escapes from the plane by crawling to the cabin door and sliding down the stairs. He rolls underneath a vehicle to keep from being shot by the commandos.
When I took my first breath, I held my breath, and when I took my first breath, I immediately started choking.
On the tarmac, Galal joins the rescue effort.
The sight was horrible. I tried to re-enter the airplane to get some of the passengers out, but it was impossible. I couldn't get in there, and that was a very painful moment, because I have realized that whatever left inside the airplane are dead.
Lyons tries to run to safety, but an Egyptian commando points a gun in his face. The commandos don't know how many hijackers there are, or what they look like. Rescuers rush the wounded from Flight 648 to St. Luke's Hospital. Maltese medical examiners estimate that of 56 passengers killed in the rescue attempt, tragically, 4 died from gunshot wounds from automatic assault rifles carried by the commandos. Over 50 passengers died from inhaling toxic fumes produced by the burnt insulation. Maltese authorities and Galal quickly identify the remains of one of the hijackers. Salim was shot to death by the Egyptian Sky Marshal. Bu Said died in the explosion. Only Omar Razak is unaccounted for. In the hospital, Anthony Lyons identifies Omar Razak in the intensive care unit.
I said, that's one of the hijackers. I said, I can end this now. I can pull the tube. And, I felt really strongly about that, seeing somebody like that. And they now knew they had Razak.
Hani Galal supports Lyons' claim.
Sure.
It's Razak.
He was shot very seriously. I mean, his heart is wounded. And I told him in Arabic while I was taken there to identify him that you will heal up and you will come with me back. I deliberately said that to him. Heal up because you will come back with me and we have a rope ready for you.
Omar Razak is directly responsible for the deaths of dozens of people, including one American citizen. The United States and the Maltese government both want to try Razak for murder, but the Maltese government takes control of the investigation. The FBI provides forensic experts to help the Maltese analyze the wreckage. They examined the charred plane, gathering evidence and building their case against Razak. In the lab, examiners positively identify a fingerprint found on a cockpit window as belonging to Omar Razak. Back in Malta, Captain Hani Galal testifies against Razak at his trial.
When you kill women and children like this, that kind of violation is unforgivable. He has to be brought to justice and he has to be punished for that.
In November 1988, Omar Razak pleads guilty to murder. Under Maltese law, he's sentenced to 25 years in prison in Malta. But it is a sentence the terrorist will never complete. In 1988, Omar Razak is sentenced to spend 25 years in prison for murder. The blood of 58 innocent people is on his hands. 7 years into Razak's imprisonment, as part of a general amnesty program, the government of Malta considers releasing the brutal terrorist. In Washington, D.C., FBI agents review the Razak case with U.S. prosecutor Joseph Valder. Special Agent Bob Clifford.
The horrific nature, the extent of his crime, to only serve 7, 8, 9 years in prison and then be released was completely unacceptable to the United States.
Razak has attacked and killed an American citizen. The United States is determined to make him pay for his crimes.
The challenge before us was to find a violation of U.S. law which we could prosecute Razak on if and when he was released.
Faust and Valder meet with Maltese officials. They get assurances from the government that Razak will probably not be freed for at least 3 years. 2 days later, the Maltese courts release Razak from prison. Special Agent Kevin Faust.
I felt I had been lied to. We had met with the authorities in Malta less than 48 hours earlier, and we were assured that we had 3 years to work on how we could find a way to bring this man to the United States to face justice. And then suddenly he's gone.
Thoughts that went through my mind was, my God, here's a trained, committed terrorist who has conducted this horrific attack without any type of remorse, being released, and being released into an area of the world that he had known connections to. And could he conduct or organize an attack like this again?
Soon after his release, Maltese authorities lose track of him.
To have him go free, to have him disappear, was not an option. Absolutely not an option. This man had killed ruthlessly a lot of people. And one way or another, no matter where, no matter how, we were going to get him. We had to.
Ethiopia, those were his areas.
48 hours have passed. Rizak could be anywhere in the world by now. Agent Clifford turns to the only agency with the means to help him, Interpol.
This Interpol notice was transmitted to, through our National Central Bureau of Interpol to all Interpol members to alert any country throughout the world if Rizak was traveling through to have him stopped, and that the United States, in fact, would request provisional arrest and extradition.
Clifford. Aeroflot Ghana.
By transmitting the information around the world to member nations of Interpol, investigators pick up Rizak's trail on a tip from an unlikely source.
In that area, Ethiopia.
According to Russian intelligence relayed through their Interpol office, Rizak has reservations aboard an Aeroflot flight bound for the Sudan by way of Ghana and Nigeria. He's traveling under an alias. Rizak flies to Accra, Ghana, but local authorities alerted by the Maltese embassy were waiting for him. Now the US State Department must wait for Ghana to release him, and that's not likely. One of the passengers who died on the plane was from Ghana.
Ghana at the time was not quite sure if they wanted to try him or if they could try him for the death of the citizen of Ghana on that aircraft in 1985.
The Americans fear that if he is tried in Ghana, Rizak may again find a way to escape justice.
This man is an animal. He's a terrorist. He's murdered people. He's violated our law. Give him to us under existing treaties. Just give him to us and we'll take him back to the United States.
One day turned into a week turned into 2 weeks, and still Ghana never came through with the commitment to allow the FBI to take custody of Rizak.
4 months later, in July 1993, Special Agent Clifford receives a startling phone call.
The government of Ghana stated, we're going to release Rizak. We're going to release him in 48 hours. And it's up to you to figure out how you're going to get him, if you want him, into custody of the FBI.
Guys, we have 48 hours.
We immediately scrambled, put together an arrest team. We knew his next stop was going to be Lagos, Nigeria.
The arrest team learns early on of Rizak's itinerary. He will be flying from Malta to Ghana to Nigeria and finally to Sudan. The government of Nigeria has agreed to cooperate, but with growing civil unrest in the country, the situation is unstable and dangerous.
We were quite concerned that the same government that had given us permission to come in and take this man from them would still be in power when we landed and when we left.
We knew when we departed Washington for Nigeria that if we missed him there, we'd never see him again. That was our only hope, is that we could stop him there and get him, because if he was not caught at that moment, if there is even just a couple of hours of difference in the flights, if something happened to our aircraft and we might have been delayed, he'd be gone. He'd be gone.
A short time later, Rizak's flight touches down in Lagos. Nigerian authorities detain him. But under pressure from the US, Nigerian police hand the hijacker over to the FBI. Omar Rizak is finally in US custody.
I've arrested many terrorists and have dealt with a lot of terrorists. But something about Rizak was his commitment. When you're dealing with someone like that, you have to be very, very cautious, because they are willing to die for what they believe in.
On June the 21st, 1996, Omar Mohammed Ali Rizak stands trial before a jury in a United States District Court for the District of Columbia. Anthony Lyons has been asked to testify.
They said, would you be willing to help? And I said, I'll swim over.
The first thing he must do is pick Rizak out of a lineup.
That's the first time I'd seen him again, was at the lineup. I saw his face and I thought, right, you're here, you're really here, great, we've got you.
On July the 19th, 1996, the jury finds Omar Mohammed Ali Rizak guilty of 1 count of air piracy.
Yeah, I was actually in the court the day that the guilty verdict was to be had by Rizak, and it was an amazing feeling, absolutely amazing.
They sentence him to life in prison.
Justice has been served. Rizak is in a maximum security prison. He's in solitary confinement. He comes out on a very limited basis to go into a cell in which he only has a skylight. But when you see the horrible, brutal acts that he committed, I mean, shooting women point blank in the head, being absolutely unremorseful for these crimes, nothing could be better for an animal like that.
Because of the brutal hijacking of Egypt Air 648 and other terrorist attacks like it, Interpol no longer considers terrorism an act of war, but a crime. Interpol can now bring its vast resources to find and capture terrorists wherever they try to hide.